I was once praised as the only person who dared to say no in the boardroom. 3 weeks later, I received a cold termination letter. They thought they could silence me with a pink slip and a non-disclosure agreement. They were wrong. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 15 years in Washington learning how to document corruption. And when you fire someone who knows where all the bodies are buried, you better make sure they don't keep copies of the map. My name is Lauren Whitaker. And until 6 weeks ago, I was the director of internal compliance at Ravenhill Partners, one of Denver's most prestigious energy consulting firms. At 39, I'd built a reputation as someone who could navigate the murky waters between profit and principle. That's what they hired me for, or so I thought. The morning everything changed started like any other. I arrived at our glass tower on 17th Street at 7:15 a.m. Colorado's autumn sun casting long shadows across the conference room where I'd soon face my first real test. My coffee was still steaming when Jonas Hartwell, our chief operating officer, dropped a stack of invoices on my desk. "Lauren, we need these approved by noon," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Standard vendor payments for the WindPath project. I'd been at Ravenhill for 8 months, recruited from my position at a D.C. law firm specializing in federal budget compliance. They'd promised me autonomy, resources, and most importantly, a mandate to clean up their compliance processes. The salary bump didn't hurt either. Denver's cost of living was refreshing after Washington's brutal market. But as I flipped through those invoices, something felt off. The amounts were wrong. The vendor names were vague. Some of the addresses led to strip malls and residential buildings. This wasn't incompetence. This was deliberate. "Jonas," I called out as he was leaving. "These need documentation. I can't approve payments to vendors without proper verification." He paused at my door, straightening his Italian suit. "Lauren, you're new to the private sector. Things move faster here. We can't get bogged down in bureaucracy." "It's not bureaucracy. It's the law." That was the moment I became a problem. I didn't know it then. But in that pristine office overlooking the Rockies, I just signed my professional death warrant. Ravenhill Partners marketed itself as the future of sustainable energy consulting. Our clients included Fortune 500 companies desperate to green their portfolios and meet ESG targets. The office buzzed with talk of carbon credits, renewable energy tax incentives, and sustainable investment strategies. Young analysts in designer suits plotted wind farm locations while senior partners negotiated million-dollar contracts over lunch at Guard and Grace. But beneath the environmental virtue, signaling, and progressive corporate culture, something rotten was festering. And I, the woman they'd hired to ensure everything was above board, had just stumbled upon it. That night, I stayed late, digging deeper into our financial systems. What I found would eventually bring down one of Colorado's most celebrated firms. But first, it would cost me everything I'd worked for. The patterns emerged slowly at first, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Over the next 3 weeks, I methodically traced every suspicious transaction, working late into the Denver nights while the office emptied around me. What started as questionable invoices revealed itself as an intricate web of financial manipulation that would make Enron's accountants blush. Shell companies with names like Green Horizon Solutions and EcoPath Consulting appeared repeatedly in our payment systems. They all had one thing in common. They existed only on paper. I cross-referenced addresses, tax IDs, and registration documents. Half led to vacant lots in industrial districts. Others traced back to the same PCO box in Aurora. The most audacious ones didn't even bother with real addresses, just strings of numbers that looked legitimate at a glance. The scale was staggering. In just the WindPath project alone, I identified over $3.2 million in duplicate payments. Vendors were being paid twice, sometimes 3 times, for the same services. Construction costs were inflated by 40%. Consulting fees for environmental impact assessments were being funneled to companies that had been dissolved years ago. I scheduled a meeting with Jonas Hartwell, armed with spreadsheets and evidence. The conference room on the 23rd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Continental Divide. Jonas arrived 15 minutes late, flanked by two senior partners I'd barely spoken to before. "I've found significant irregularities in our vendor payment system," I began, sliding copies of my report across the polished table. "We need to conduct a full internal audit and report these findings to—" "Lauren," Jonas interrupted, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension masked as concern. "You're seeing shadows where there are none. These are standard industry practices. Complex projects require flexible financial structures." "Flexible, Jonas? We're paying companies that don't exist. We're billing clients for services never rendered. This isn't flexibility, it's fraud." The room went cold. One of the senior partners, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Morse, leaned forward. "Ms. Whitaker, you were hired to ensure compliance, not to play detective. Perhaps you're not understanding the nuances of private sector energy consulting." "I understand fraud when I see it," I shot back. "And I understand my legal obligations as a compliance officer. If we don't self-report, we're all personally liable when this comes to light." Jonas stood up, buttoning his jacket. "This meeting is over. Lauren, I'm restricting your system access to your immediate departmental needs. Focus on the employee handbook updates we discussed last month. Leave the financial operations to those of us who understand them." Within hours, my access to the financial systems was revoked. My keycard no longer opened the server room. Meetings I'd been invited to were mysteriously rescheduled without notice. The assistants who used to greet me warmly now avoided eye contact in the halls. But it was Marcus Webb, a junior analyst who'd started the same week as me, who delivered the warning I should have heeded. He caught me at the parking garage one evening, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Lauren, you need to stop," he whispered urgently. "The last compliance director, Rebecca Thorne, she pushed too hard. They destroyed her. Blacklisted her from every firm in the country. She lost her house, her reputation, everything. Now she's teaching community college in Nebraska." "Marcus, if you know something—" "I don't know anything," he said quickly, already backing away. "And neither do you. That's how you survive here." But I couldn't unknow what I'd discovered. The evidence was burning a hole in my conscience. Every day I stayed silent, I became more complicit. So I did what any good compliance officer would do. I documented everything, late at night, using my personal laptop and a VPN. I compiled a comprehensive report. Screenshots, transaction records, incorporation documents, email chains, 147 pages of irrefutable evidence that Ravenhill Partners was operating the largest greenwashing fraud scheme in the western United States. I submitted the report to our internal audit committee on a Thursday afternoon, following every protocol, every procedure. I even sent a courtesy copy to our external auditors, as required by our own compliance manual. Friday morning, I arrived to find my office locked and two security guards waiting by my desk. The termination meeting was a masterclass in corporate assassination. Kendra Malloy, our Chief Human Resources Officer, sat across from me in a small conference room I'd never seen before, windowless, sterile, and conveniently located next to the security office. She wore a charcoal suit that matched her expression, her manicured nails tapping against a folder marked "Confidential" in red letters. "Lauren, I'm afraid we need to discuss your recent performance," she began, not bothering with pleasantries. "Multiple department heads have raised concerns about your disruptive behavior and inability to integrate with our corporate culture." "Disruptive?" I kept my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. "You mean reporting financial fraud?" Kendra's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "We've reviewed your so-called report. What you call fraud, our legal team calls standard industry optimization. What you call evidence, we call misunderstanding of complex financial instruments." She slid a document across the table. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Ravenhill Partners is terminated for cause. Specifically, insubordination, creating a hostile work environment, and breach of confidentiality protocols." I scanned the termination letter, my stomach dropping with each line. They weren't just firing me. They were constructing a narrative that would follow me everywhere. The language was carefully crafted to paint me as an unstable employee who'd become paranoid and disruptive. "This is retaliation," I said. "You know it, I know it, and any court would—" "Would what?" Kendra interrupted. "Side with a disgruntled employee who couldn't handle the pace of private sector work, who sent wild accusations to external parties without following proper channels." She opened her folder, revealing printed emails. "We have documentation of your erratic behavior, your refusal to participate in team meetings, your aggressive confrontations with senior leadership." Every word was a lie wrapped in just enough truth to be believed. Yes, I'd been excluded from meetings after they revoked my access. Yes, I'd confronted leadership about fraud. "Now," Kendra continued, pulling out another document, "we're prepared to offer you a generous severance package. 6 months' salary, continuation of health benefits, and a neutral reference. All you need to do is sign this separation agreement." I read through the agreement, my anger building with each paragraph. It wasn't just a standard NDA, it was a legal muzzle. I would be barred from discussing anything about Ravenhill's operations, forbidden from contacting any current or former clients, and required to return or destroy all company-related documents. "Clause 47 is particularly interesting," I said. "I'm required to deny any knowledge of financial irregularities if questioned by authorities. That's asking me to commit perjury." "It's asking you to be smart," Kendra replied. "Sign the agreement, take the money, and move on with your life. Or don't sign. And see how far you get in this industry with Ravenhill's mark on your record." I stood up, leaving the agreement unsigned on the table. "I'll take my chances." "Security will escort you out," she said, already gathering her papers. "You have 15 minutes to collect your personal items." The walk to my office felt like a funeral march. Colleagues I'd worked with for months suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. The security guards flanked me like I was a criminal, their presence announcing my disgrace to everyone we passed. In my office, I moved quickly. While one guard watched from the doorway, I packed my personal items, photos, my coffee mug, a small cactus my daughter had given me. But my real focus was on my computer. During my last week, knowing this moment might come, I'd been systematically backing up everything to a cloud service the IT department didn't monitor. Financial records, emails, internal memos. All of it safely stored beyond Ravenhill's reach. As I disconnected my personal laptop, my fingers brushed against a USB drive hidden behind my monitor. 3 weeks ago, I'd installed a program that recorded all my desktop activity, including several damning conversations with Jonas where he'd explicitly told me to make the numbers work and stop asking questions. The IT department had never detected it. "Time's up," the guard announced. I slipped the USB into my pocket and picked up my box. As we reached the elevator, Jonas Hartwell appeared, wanting his moment of victory. "It didn't have to end this way, Lauren," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "All you had to do was play ball." "No," I replied, meeting his gaze. "All I had to do was my job." The elevator doors closed on his smirk, but I knew something he didn't. In my car, I had copies of every document, every email, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. They could fire me, they could blacklist me, but they couldn't erase the truth. 20 minutes later, sitting in my car in the parking garage, I made 2 calls. The first was to my husband, telling him I'd been fired. The second was to Alex Rubin, a federal prosecutor I'd worked with in D.C. "Alex, it's Lauren Whitaker. Remember how you always said to call if I found something big? Well, I just found something enormous." The next 6 weeks taught me how efficiently a well-connected company could destroy someone's life. My LinkedIn profile, once showcasing 15 years of spotless compliance work, became a wasteland overnight. Connection requests were withdrawn. Endorsements disappeared. Former colleagues who'd praised my thoroughness now wouldn't return my calls. The Whisper network in Denver's corporate compliance community was more effective than any formal blacklist. I'd send out resumes and receive polite rejections within hours, sometimes from companies that had actively recruited me just months earlier. One HR director, someone I'd known since my days, finally broke the silence during an off-the-record phone call. Lauren, your name is toxic right now. Ravenhill's legal team has been making calls, warning firms about your instability and propensity for false accusations. They're hinting at potential litigation against anyone who hires you. I'm sorry. But no one wants that risk. My savings dwindled as the bills kept coming. My husband Michael's teacher salary couldn't cover our Denver mortgage alone. I watched our daughter Emma pretend not to notice when I said no to her school's ski trip, claiming I was too busy to chaperone rather than admit we couldn't afford it. But while my professional life crumbled, I was building something else in the shadows. Every night after Michael and Emma went to bed, I descended into our basement office and refined my case. Alex Rubin had connected me with a forensic accountant willing to work pro bono, intrigued by the scale of what I'd uncovered. "This is sophisticated," she told me during one late-night video call, her screen filled with flowcharts tracking Ravenhill's money. "They're using the complexity of renewable energy credits and carbon offset markets to hide massive embezzlement. The average auditor would miss it because it's buried in legitimate-looking transactions." I also discovered I wasn't alone. Through encrypted forums and careful networking, I found 3 other former Ravenhill employees who'd been similarly purged. Rebecca Thorne, my predecessor, now taught business ethics at a community college in Omaha. She'd kept her own records, but had been too frightened to use them after Ravenhill's lawyers threatened to sue her for defamation and theft of proprietary information. "They broke me," Rebecca told me during a clandestine meeting at a truck stop halfway between Denver and Omaha. "I had 2 kids in college. I couldn't risk losing everything. But you're different, Lauren. You have the kind of evidence I could only dream of." Together, we assembled what I called the Ravenhill Files, a comprehensive document that exposed not just financial fraud, but a systematic pattern of deceiving investors, manipulating environmental impact data, and defrauding the federal government through false claims on green energy tax credits. The total amount stolen or misappropriated exceeded $47 million over 5 years. The turning point came when I discovered Ravenhill's fatal flaw: hubris. In their rush to silence me, they'd forgotten about the automated backup system that archived all emails to a third-party server for regulatory compliance. Thanks to a sympathetic IT contractor who'd been laid off the week after I was fired, I gained access to thousands of internal communications that showed explicit knowledge of the fraud at the highest levels. One email thread particularly stood out. Jonas Hartwell writing to the CEO, "LW is becoming a problem. She's found the wind path discrepancies. Recommend immediate termination before she digs deeper into the solar initiative numbers." The CEO's response, "Handle it. Make sure she can't cause problems afterward. The IPO roadshow starts in 6 months." An IPO. They were planning to take the company public, to sell shares to unsuspecting investors based on fraudulent financials. The scale of the crime was staggering. I worked with Alex to ensure every piece of evidence was legally obtained and properly documented. We created multiple copies, stored in different locations. I even sent a sealed copy to my attorney with instructions to release it if anything happened to me. Perhaps paranoid. But Ravenhill had already shown how far they'd go to protect their secrets. By week 5 of my unemployment, I was ready. The Ravenhill Files contained 87 pages of narrative summary and over 300 pages of supporting documentation. Financial records, emails, recorded conversations, sworn affidavits from former employees, and detailed analysis from forensic accountants. On a gray Thursday morning, I sat in my car outside the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission's Denver regional office. In my hands was a USB drive containing enough evidence to destroy Ravenhill Partners. Once I walked through those doors, there would be no going back. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. Emma and I love you." I thought about Rebecca Thorne, exiled to Omaha. I thought about the investors who'd pour money into Ravenhill's IPO. I thought about the legitimate environmental projects that would suffer when this scandal broke. Most of all, I thought about the morning Jonas Hartwell told me to approve those fraudulent invoices, so confident I'd comply. I locked my car and walked toward the building, USB drive in hand. They'd taken my job, my reputation, and my financial security. But they'd failed to take my integrity. It was time to show them what that would cost them. The SEC meeting lasted 4 hours. 3 investigators, 2 lawyers, and a forensic accountant sat across from me in a sterile conference room, their faces revealing nothing as I walked them through every detail of Ravenhill's fraud. They asked precise questions, took meticulous notes, and made copies of everything. When I finally emerged into the Denver afternoon, I felt simultaneously drained and electric. "We'll be in touch," the lead investigator had said. "Don't discuss this meeting with anyone." But I wasn't done. Federal investigations moved at glacial pace, and Ravenhill was still operating, still defrauding investors, still planning their IPO. I needed a second front. That's when Elise Duncan entered my life. An investigative journalist with the Denver Dispatch, she'd been tracking environmental fraud in Colorado for years. Her number came from Rebecca Thorne, who'd watched Elise expose a water rights scam the previous year. We met at Union Station, the afternoon crowd providing cover for our conversation. Elise was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "I've been following Ravenhill for 2 years," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "They keep announcing these massive renewable projects that never quite materialize. The wind path development was supposed to power 50,000 homes. Drive by the site. It's an empty field with 3 broken turbines." "I have something that might interest you," I said, producing my own folder. "But I need guarantees. Full source protection, legal review before publication, and you verify everything independently." Elise opened the folder and went very still. For 10 minutes, she read in silence, occasionally photographing pages with her phone. Finally, she looked up. "This is... Jesus. Lauren, this isn't just fraud. This is systematic looting disguised as environmental activism. Can you use it?" "Use it?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This is Pulitzer material. But you're right, I need to verify independently. Give me 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years. I applied for jobs outside compliance, desperate for income, grocery store clerk, administrative assistant, anything to keep our lights on. Michael took extra tutoring sessions. Emma stopped asking about her ski trip. Then Elise called. "I need to see you. Now." We met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. She looked exhausted but energized, the way journalists get when they smell blood in the water. "Everything checks out," she said. "But it's bigger than your files showed. I found 3 other companies using the same scheme. There's a whole network, Lauren. Ravenhill is just the tip." "When do you publish?" "Sunday edition, front page, but there's something else." She pulled out her laptop, showing me an email. "This came through our anonymous tip line yesterday." The email was from a Ravenhill insider, warning that the company knew about the investigation and was preparing to flee. Jonas Hartwell had been spotted at Denver International Airport with briefcases that security flagged as containing large amounts of cash. 2 senior partners had suddenly taken medical leave. "They're going to run," I said. "Not if the story breaks first. Once it's public, every airport will have their faces. But Lauren, you need to know, once this publishes, you'll be in the spotlight. Ravenhill will come after you with everything they have." I thought about the past 2 months of isolation, the suicide of my career, the slow strangulation of my family's finances. They already have. Elise spent the next 3 days fact-checking, getting quotes, building an airtight story. She interviewed former employees, analyzed public records, even hired a drone to photograph the empty project sites Ravenhill claimed were operational wind farms. Meanwhile, I worked with Alex Rubin to ensure the SEC was ready. The morning the story would break, federal agents would raid Ravenhill's offices, freezing accounts and seizing documents. The Friday before publication. My phone rang. Jonas Hartwell. "Lauren." His voice had lost its usual smugness. "Let's talk. We can work something out." We have nothing to discuss. Everyone has a price. What's yours? 7 figures? 8? You could retire, move somewhere warm. This doesn't have to destroy both of us. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided to steal millions in the name of saving the planet. You sanctimonious. He caught himself. You think you've won. You think destroying Ravenhill makes you a hero? You'll be unemployable. We'll sue you into bankruptcy. Your daughter will grow up knowing her mother threw away everything for nothing. No, I said quietly. She'll grow up knowing her mother did the right thing. I hung up and blocked his number. Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. In 12 hours, the Denver Dispatch would hit doorsteps across Colorado with Elise's story. Greenwashing, how Ravenhill partners stole millions through fake environmental projects. I sat in my basement office, looking at the boxes of evidence that had cost me everything to compile. Tomorrow, it would all be worth it. Tomorrow, the truth would be undeniable. My phone buzzed. A text from Elise. Final draft filed, legal approved. It's happening. Thank you for your courage. Courage? Is that what this was? It felt more like survival. They'd tried to bury me, not knowing I'd kept the receipts for my own funeral. Tomorrow, Ravenhill partners would wake up to their worst nightmare, accountability. Sunday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. At 5:47 a.m., my phone erupted with notifications. The Denver Dispatch website had posted Elise's investigation online, ahead of the print edition. Within minutes, it was the most read story in the paper's history. The headline screamed across my laptop screen, Greenwashing, how Ravenhill partners stole millions through fake environmental projects. Below it, a subheading that made my heart race. Whistleblower Lauren Whitaker exposes massive fraud scheme at Colorado energy firm. Elise had crafted a masterpiece of investigative journalism. The article methodically laid out Ravenhill's crimes with surgical precision. Fake invoices reproduced in devastating detail. A timeline showing how federal green energy subsidies meant for legitimate projects had been diverted into offshore accounts. Photographs of empty lots where multi-million-dollar solar farms supposedly existed. By 7 a.m., the story had been picked up by national outlets. CNN, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. Everyone wanted a piece of Ravenhill's carcass. My phone rang constantly. I turned it off. At 8:15 a.m., Michael called me to the window. Black SUVs were pulling up to our neighbor's house, except they weren't visiting the neighbors. Federal agents and FBI and SEC windbreakers emerged, walking purposefully toward Ravenhill executives' homes throughout Denver's affluent suburbs. The first domino fell at 9 a.m. Orion Solar, Ravenhill's largest client, announced the immediate termination of all contracts. Their statement was brutal. We cannot and will not associate with partners who betray the core values of the sustainable energy movement. By noon, the exodus was complete. AmeriGrid, Renewable Resources International, EcoInvest Strategies, every major client fled like rats from a sinking ship. Ravenhill's website went dark. Their phone lines gave busy signals. The office building security reported that employees were being turned away at the door. The entire floor sealed with federal warrant tape. Jonas Hartwell was arrested at his country club, hauled away in handcuffs while his golf partners watched. The footage, captured by a local news crew, played on repeat across cable news. The mighty COO who'd told me everyone does it was now doing a perp walk in his designer golf attire. But the true avalanche came Monday morning. The SEC announced a formal investigation not just into Ravenhill, but into what they called a network of interconnected schemes targeting environmental investment funds. The Colorado Attorney General launched a parallel criminal investigation. The IRS announced they were reviewing 5 years of Ravenhill's tax filings. By Tuesday, Ravenhill partners had ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Their assets were frozen. Their offices were crime scenes. Their executives were lawyering up with defense attorneys who charged more per hour than most people made in a month. Wednesday brought the congressional subpoena. The House Committee on Energy and Commerce wanted me to testify about systemic fraud in green energy investments. My lawyer, provided pro bono by a nonprofit supporting whistleblowers, assured me this was good news. "You're not a target," she explained. "You're their star witness. This is your chance to ensure real change happens." The week culminated with a phone call I'd been expecting. Kendra Malloy, the HR chief who'd fired me with such satisfaction, had been arrested trying to board a flight to Costa Rica with $400,000 in cash hidden in her luggage. She was offering to testify against her colleagues in exchange for leniency. "Rats and sinking ships," Michael said, reading the news over my shoulder. But the personal vindication came in smaller moments. LinkedIn connection requests from people who'd ghosted me. Emails from compliance officers across the country, thanking me for my courage. A handwritten note from Rebecca Thorne. "You did what I couldn't. Thank you." 3 major compliance firms reached out with job offers. The salaries they mentioned were double what Ravenhill had paid. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. The congressional hearing was set for the following month. I spent my days preparing testimony, working with federal investigators, and slowly rebuilding my professional reputation. Emma got to go on her ski trip, anonymously paid for by someone who'd read our story. I had my suspicions about the donor, but Elise would never confirm. The night before I was to fly to Washington for the hearing, I stood in my basement office one last time. The boxes of evidence were gone, turned over to federal investigators. The wall where I'd mapped Ravenhill's fraud was now bare. This room, which had been my war room for months, was just a basement again. Jonas Hartwell had been wrong about one thing. My daughter didn't grow up seeing me as someone who threw everything away. She saw me as someone who refused to let powerful people steal with impunity. "Mom," Emma said, appearing in the doorway, "I'm proud of you." Those 3 words were worth more than any settlement Ravenhill could have offered. Tomorrow, I would sit before Congress and tell the truth about an industry that had lost its way, about executives who'd perverted the environmental movement for personal gain. But tonight, I was just Lauren Whitaker, compliance officer, mother, and proof that sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. The fortress Ravenhill had built with lies and stolen money had crumbled in less than a week. All it had taken was one person willing to light the match. The congressional hearing room was smaller than it appeared on television. Wood-paneled walls, the smell of old leather and fresh coffee, and the weight of history pressing down from every corner. I sat at the witness table, a glass of water my only companion, facing a semicircle of representatives who would decide whether my truth mattered. "State your name for the record," the committee chair instructed. "Lauren Whitaker." For 3 hours, I testified. No notes needed, every detail was burned into my memory. I explained the shell companies, the fraudulent invoices, the systematic theft disguised as environmental progress. I showed them how Ravenhill had weaponized the complexity of green energy markets to hide their crimes. I named names, cited figures, and provided evidence that made even the most jaded committee members lean forward in their seats. The opposition came from Ravenhill's defenders, representatives who'd received campaign contributions from the very companies implicated in the fraud. They tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee, a failed compliance officer who'd misunderstood legitimate business practices. "Ms. Whitaker," one congressman drawled, "isn't it true you were terminated for performance issues?" "I was terminated for refusing to approve fraudulent payments," I responded. "The performance issue was that I performed my job too well." When the hearing ended, I didn't stay for the media scrum. There would be no victory laps, no television interviews, no book deals. That wasn't why I'd done this. Jonas Hartwell was convicted on 17 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. His sentence, 25 years in federal prison. The day of his sentencing, he passed me in the courthouse hallway. Our eyes met for a moment. He looked smaller somehow, his designer suit replaced by a cheap gray outfit his lawyer had probably bought at JCPenney. "Still think everyone does it?" I asked quietly. He had no answer. Kendra Malloy got 12 years. Patricia Morse, 15. In total, 14. Ravenhill executives received prison sentences. The company's assets were liquidated to pay back defrauded investors and the federal government. The IRS recovered $32 million in stolen tax credits. But the real victory came 6 months later when Congress passed the Green Energy Transparency Act, requiring stricter oversight of environmental investment funds. The press called it the Whitaker Law, though my name appeared nowhere in the legislation. I never took those job offers from the big compliance firms. Instead, I started my own consulting company, specializing in helping legitimate environmental companies build bulletproof compliance systems. My first client was a small wind farm in Wyoming, paying me barely enough to cover expenses. But they were real. Their turbines actually turned. Their electricity actually powered homes. Rebecca Thorne joined me as a partner 6 months later. Together, we built something Ravenhill had only pretended to be, a company that actually helped save the planet while keeping its books clean. The last time I drove past Ravenhill's old offices, the building had been converted into affordable housing. A small plaque by the entrance read, "Funded by recovered proceeds from financial crimes." I didn't stop to read the details. Emma, now in college studying environmental law, sometimes asks if I regret what happened. The months of unemployment, the stress on our family, the complete destruction of my old life. Your father and I had saved some money, I tell her. We could have weathered it. What I couldn't have weathered was staying silent. There's a photo on my office wall now, not of my triumph, but of the moment before everything changed. It shows me at my Ravenhill desk, compliance manuals stacked high, still believing I could reform the system from within. I keep it as a reminder. Sometimes the system doesn't need reform. Sometimes it needs to be exposed, dismantled, and rebuilt. Jonas Hartwell was wrong about something else too. He said I'd be unemployable, that Ravenhill's mark would follow me forever. He was half right. Ravenhill's mark did follow me, as a badge of honor. The woman who brought down Colorado's biggest environmental fraud. The compliance officer who couldn't be bought. I never needed their silence money. The truth, it turns out, pays better dividends. The morning sun catches on the glass doors of the SEC building in Denver. The same doors I walked through with shaking hands and a USB drive full of evidence. I pass by sometimes, on my way to legitimate clients who value honesty over concealment. I don't stop. I don't need to. The building knows what happened here. The city knows. The industry knows. And in the end, that's all the vindication anyone really needs. The truth, spoken plainly, in a quiet voice that refuses to be silenced. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands in the light and waits for the shadows to flee. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts on Lauren's journey. What would you have done in her position?